Logan Carter needed a date for the most important charity gala of the year, and he needed one fast. Sitting in his sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline, he scrolled through his phone, ignoring the endless stream of messages from women practically begging to be his plus one. Models, socialites, actresses, any of them would have jumped at the chance. But Logan didn't want another night of forced conversation and empty smiles. He needed someone different, someone who wouldn't treat him like a walking bank account. "Still no luck?" his assistant Jordan asked, leaning against the doorway. Logan exhaled sharply, tossing his phone onto his desk. "I'm not bringing someone just for the sake of appearances. I need someone who won't make the night unbearable," Jordan smirked. "So you need someone real." "Exactly." Jordan hesitated before grinning. "I might know someone," Logan arched a brow. "Who?" "My little sister's best friend, Natalie Monroe. She's smart, funny, and not remotely interested in your money." That caught Logan's attention. "Not interested in my money," Jordan chuckled. "She doesn't even know who you are. She works at a bakery, barely has time to breathe, let alone keep up with the city's eligible millionaires." Logan leaned back, intrigued. "And she'd actually agree to go," Jordan shrugged. "I can convince her, but no guarantees she'll be impressed by your usual charm." "A challenge," Logan smirked. "Perfect." Natalie Monroe wiped the flour from her hands, sighing as she glanced at Jordan, who had just barged into the bakery 10 minutes before closing. "You want me to do what?" Jordan grinned. "Go to a gala with Logan Carter," Natalie blinked. "The Logan Carter, the guy who owns half the real estate in the city." "The very one," she scoffed. "Why would he need me as his date?" "He needs someone real, someone who won't fawn over him all night. You're the most down-to-earth person I know." Natalie shook her head, tying her apron tighter. "I don't do fancy galas, Jordan. I don't even own a dress that would work for something like that." Jordan smirked. "Logan will take care of that." Natalie hesitated. A night in a designer dress at a lavish event with a man who looked like he belonged on a magazine cover. It was tempting, but something about it felt dangerous. Like stepping into a world she didn't belong in. "I don't know," Jordan sighed. "Just one night, Nat. You make it through the evening, smile for a few pictures, and you never have to see him again." That should have reassured her. So why did the thought of never seeing Logan Carter again make her stomach twist? Against her better judgment, she exhaled. "Fine, I'll do it," Jordan grinned. "You won't regret it." She already did. The night of the gala, Natalie stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing herself. The deep emerald gown hugged her figure perfectly, the fabric shimmering under the soft lighting. Logan had sent a personal stylist, a hair and makeup team, and a driver. It was overwhelming, to say the least. A knock at the door made her heart leap. Taking a deep breath, she opened it and nearly forgot how to breathe. Logan stood there in a perfectly tailored black tux, his sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes making it nearly impossible to look away. He studied her, a slow smirk forming. "You clean up well," he murmured. Natalie crossed her arms. "You say that like I usually don't." His smirk widened. "I meant it as a compliment." She rolled her eyes but couldn't deny the warmth spreading through her chest. "Shall we?" Logan offered his arm. Natalie hesitated before slipping her hand into his. As soon as their skin touched, a strange electricity shot through her. She told herself it was nothing, it had to be nothing. The gala was everything she imagined: grand chandeliers, champagne fountains, and a sea of people dressed in designer labels. Logan guided her through the crowd effortlessly, introducing her to important figures, charming everyone in sight. To her surprise, he was different than she expected. He wasn't just some arrogant millionaire. He was sharp, witty, and genuinely passionate about the charity the gala was supporting. "Not what you expected," Logan murmured, catching her staring. Natalie flushed. "What?" You're looking at me like I'm supposed to be some heartless businessman. She tilted her head. Are you saying you're not? Logan chuckled. I have my moments. Natalie found herself smiling. She was supposed to survive the night and never see him again. So why did she suddenly wish this night wouldn't end? Natalie hadn't expected to enjoy herself, but she couldn't deny the way Logan made everything effortless. He moved through the room with a confidence that was impossible to ignore, but what surprised her was how he ensured she never felt out of place. Whenever someone spoke to her, he made sure she was part of the conversation, never letting her feel like an outsider in his world. She found herself laughing at a remark he made about one of the attendees, her guard slipping more than she intended. But just as she was starting to let herself relax, a woman approached, her smile laced with something sharp. "Logan," the woman purred, placing a hand on his arm. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't show." Natalie instinctively took a small step back, suddenly aware of the way people were watching. Logan's expression didn't change, but there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. "Vanessa," he greeted, his tone polite but distant. Vanessa's gaze flickered to Natalie, assessing, "And this must be your date." Natalie lifted her chin. "Natalie Monroe." The woman's lips curved just slightly. It's always interesting to see who Logan brings to these things. There was an implication in her tone, something that made Natalie's stomach tighten, but before she could react, Logan smoothly redirected the conversation. "Excuse us, Vanessa, we were just heading to get a drink." Without waiting for a response, he placed a hand at the small of Natalie's back and guided her away. Once they were clear of prying ears, Natalie glanced at him. "Friend of yours," Logan exhaled through his nose, "something like that." She arched a brow. "I take it she's not thrilled about your choice of date." His lips twitched. "Vanessa enjoys making people feel like they don't belong." "I don't particularly care what she thinks." Natalie searched his face, trying to decipher whether he was being honest. She had no doubt that women like Vanessa were more his usual type, polished, elegant, belonging to this world in a way that Natalie never could. Still, there was something in the way Logan looked at her, something that made her wonder if he saw her differently than the rest. "Let's get some air," he suggested, reading something in her expression. She nodded, allowing him to lead her onto the balcony. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. The city stretched out before them, lights flickering like stars against the dark. Logan leaned against the railing, watching her. Regretting saying yes, Natalie considered the question. "It's not what I expected," he smirked. "And what did you expect?" She turned to face him fully. "A night of forced small talk and pretending to be someone I'm not." His gaze flickered with something unreadable. "And is that what this feels like?" She hesitated. "No." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the city buzzed below, but up here, it felt like they were in their own world. Logan studied her, his usual air of ease replaced by something more serious. "You don't belong to this world, but you don't try to change yourself to fit into it either." Natalie tilted her head. "Is that a bad thing?" His expression softened. "Not at all." Something shifted in the air between them, something neither of them acknowledged but both felt. Before Natalie could dwell on it, Logan straightened. "Stay here," he said suddenly. She frowned. "Why?" His smirk returned, but there was a spark of mischief in his eyes. "Just trust me." With that, he disappeared back inside. Natalie leaned against the railing, exhaling. She wasn't sure what to make of Logan Carter. He was charming, yes, but there was more to him than that. Something genuine beneath the polished exterior. A few minutes later, he returned, holding something behind his back. Curious, she narrowed her eyes. "What are you hiding?" Without a word, he revealed 2 small plates, each holding a slice of cake. Her brows lifted. "You smuggled dessert out of your own gala," he grinned. "Saw it on the menu and figured you'd appreciate it." She stared at him, something warm settling in her chest. "You don't even know what kind of cake I like." "Lucky guess." Shaking her head, she took a bite, savoring the sweetness. "You surprise me, Logan." He watched her, his expression unreadable. "Good." The night stretched on, and for the first time Natalie forgot about the expectations, the differences between their worlds. For the first time, it felt like they were just two people, standing beneath the city lights, sharing something neither of them had anticipated. The gala had come to an end, and yet, neither Logan nor Natalie seemed eager to part ways. The sleek black car pulled up in front of her apartment, the city humming quietly around them. The warmth of the evening still lingered in the air, but it was nothing compared to the charged silence between them. Logan leaned slightly against the back seat, watching her. "You don't have to rush inside," he said, voice low, unreadable. Natalie hesitated, fingers grazing the edge of her gown. "And what exactly do you propose, Logan?" His lips curved at her use of his name as if he liked the way it sounded coming from her. "A walk, unless you're too tired." She wasn't. In fact, she felt more awake than she had in years. "Fine," she said. They stepped out of the car, moving through the quiet street. The heels she wore should have been unbearable by now, but she barely noticed them. Logan walked beside her, his hands in his pockets, the expensive material of his tux catching the glow of the streetlights. "I meant what I said earlier," he finally said. She glanced at him. "You say a lot of things," a soft chuckle. "I meant that you don't change yourself to fit in." She thought about that. "And what about you?" "You seem to fit in anywhere," he exhaled, his gaze fixed ahead. "That's the trick, isn't it? Making people think you belong everywhere, even when you don't." She studied him, sensing something unspoken beneath his words. "You don't seem like someone who doubts where he belongs." He stopped walking, turning to her. "You'd be surprised." The weight of his gaze sent something sharp and unexpected through her. She had come into this night thinking she would leave untouched, unaffected. But Logan Carter had a way of making things feel different, like she was seeing past the man everyone else saw. And that was dangerous. She looked away, exhaling. "I should go inside." Logan didn't argue, but when she turned toward her apartment door, his fingers brushed against her wrist, stopping her. It was the lightest touch, but it sent her pulse racing. "Would it be a terrible idea if I saw you again?" he asked. She swallowed, heart pounding. "Probably," he smirked, but there was something softer in his expression. "I think I like terrible ideas." Her lips parted, but before she could respond, he released her wrist and stepped back. "Good night, Natalie." His voice was smoother than silk, but there was something deliberate in the way he left her standing there, as if he wanted to give her a choice. She watched as he walked back to the car, the door closing behind him. She should have felt relieved that the night was over. But as she let herself into her apartment, all she could feel was the absence of his presence. The next morning, Natalie tried to convince herself that last night had been a one-time thing. But when she arrived at the bakery, she found a sleek black envelope waiting for her. Inside was a simple card, the paper smooth between her fingers. "Dinner. Tonight. If you say no, I'll just keep sending cake until you say yes." She stared at the message, torn between disbelief and something dangerously close to anticipation. Jordan leaned over the counter, smirking. "That from Logan." Natalie shot him a look. "You knew about this?" "I might have given him your favorite bakery," she groaned, tossing the card onto the counter. "This is ridiculous." Jordan crossed his arms. "So you're saying no?" She wanted to. She really did. But the memory of Logan's gaze, the way he had looked at her like she was something unexpected, something worth chasing, it unsettled her. And yet, she still found herself reaching for her phone. Jordan grinned. "That's what I thought." The restaurant Logan had chosen was nothing short of breathtaking. The dim lighting, the flicker of candlelight against the dark wood furnishings, it was intimate, luxurious, and completely out of her element. Yet, when she spotted Logan waiting at a private table, dressed in a crisp black shirt with the top button undone, his gaze locked onto her like she was the only thing in the room, she no longer felt out of place. She felt wanted. "Glad you didn't make me resort to bribing you with cake," he murmured as she sat across from him. She smirked. "You assume cake wouldn't have worked." His chuckle was deep, rolling through her in a way that made her stomach tighten. Duly noted. They talked, and to her surprise, Logan wasn't the man she thought he'd be. He listened, asked questions. He didn't just want to impress her, he wanted to know her. Halfway through the meal, he leaned back, watching her in that way of his. "You're different from anyone I've met," she arched a brow. "Because I don't throw myself at you." A slow grin. "Because you make me work for it." She shook her head, but she couldn't stop the warmth spreading through her. Then, just when she thought the night couldn't unravel any further, a voice cut through the air. "Well, well," Vanessa's voice was smooth, dripping with amusement as she approached their table. "Didn't expect to see you here, Logan." Natalie stiffened, but Logan remained calm, his expression unreadable. Vanessa's gaze flickered to Natalie, her smirk sharp. "And you again." "How unexpected." Natalie clenched her jaw, but Logan spoke before she could. "We're in the middle of something, Vanessa." His tone was polite but firm. Vanessa's expression didn't falter. "Of course, I wouldn't dream of interrupting your arrangement." Natalie's stomach twisted, but she refused to let the words get to her. Logan, however, went rigid. "Vanessa, I'll leave you to it," she said, her smirk widening before she sauntered off. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. Natalie placed her fork down, leveling Logan with a look. "Care to explain?" His jaw flexed. "Vanessa likes to cause trouble." "That's not an explanation," he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "She's an old complication." "One I should have handled a long time ago." Natalie studied him. "And yet she still thinks she has a say in your life." His gaze snapped to hers, something dark flickering in his expression. "She doesn't." And yet, the way Vanessa had spoken, the ease with which she had inserted herself into his world, it was clear their history wasn't as simple as he wanted to pretend. Natalie leaned back, crossing her arms. "I don't do games, Logan." His expression softened, but there was something almost desperate in the way he leaned toward her. "Neither do I." "Not with you." She wanted to believe him, but as much as she hated to admit it, she wasn't sure if she could. Natalie wasn't sure what she had expected after Vanessa's interruption, but Logan had remained steadfast, unwavering in his focus on her. He hadn't tried to downplay the situation with charm or empty words. Instead, he had been honest, blunt, even. "I won't let anyone interfere with this," he had said, voice firm, gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. And she had believed him. Now, days later, she found herself in unfamiliar territory. Logan had continued reaching out, sending her small reminders that he was thinking about her, a single flower left at the bakery, a note tucked into a delivery of fresh pastries for her and her coworkers, a simple message asking how her day had been. It was dangerous, because the more he did these things, the more she realized she wanted them. She was standing behind the bakery counter, lost in thought, when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, expecting a customer, but instead, Logan stood there, dressed in a casual button-down and dark jeans, looking completely out of place in the small shop. Her heart did a ridiculous little flip. "You're persistent," she said, crossing her arms. His smirk was slow, deliberate. "I prefer determined." She shook her head but couldn't stop her lips from twitching. "What brings you here?" Logan glanced at the display case, then back to her. "I was hoping you'd join me for lunch." Natalie hesitated. There was a certainty in the way he asked, as if he already knew she'd say yes. And maybe that was what made her decision for her, because part of her wanted to prove him wrong, but a bigger part of her wanted to go. She untied her apron, tossing it onto the hook behind the counter. "Fine, but only because I need a break." Logan's grin was victorious. They walked through the city, the conversation easy, natural. He told her about his latest project, a new development that was meant to provide affordable housing in an area that desperately needed it. She watched the way he spoke about it, how his usual confidence was laced with something more passion, purpose. "You actually care," she murmured, surprised. He glanced at her. "You thought I didn't," she shrugged. "People like you," she hesitated. "You don't usually do things unless there's something in it for you." Logan didn't argue. Instead, he simply said, "Maybe there is something in it for me. Maybe I want to prove I'm more than the man people assume I am." That quiet confession did something to her. They ended up in a small, tucked-away restaurant, one she had never even noticed before. Logan seemed to know the owner, exchanging a few words in Italian before leading her to a private corner table. The intimacy of the setting made her nervous. "You're looking at me like you're about to bolt," Logan observed, leaning back in his chair. Natalie exhaled. Whatever this is feels like a terrible idea." Logan studied her. "Why?" she gestured vaguely. "Because you're you, and I don't fit into your world, Logan." A slow smile spread across his lips. "Who says I want you to?" She blinked. "What?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I don't want you to fit into my world, Natalie. I want something different, something real." Her heart pounded. Before she could respond, the food arrived, breaking the tension. But the words lingered between them, unspoken but undeniable. As they ate, Logan surprised her again. He asked about her dreams, what she wanted beyond the bakery, beyond the routine of her life. "No one's ever really asked me that before," she admitted. Logan's expression softened. "Then tell me now." She hesitated, then exhaled. "I've always wanted to open my own place, a cafe maybe, something that's mine." Logan nodded as if he had expected that answer. "Then why haven't you?" She toyed with the edge of her napkin. "Money, stability, fear." Logan's gaze didn't waver. "What if you didn't have to be afraid?" Something in his tone made her stomach twist. She narrowed her eyes. "Logan, I'm not saying I'm going to throw money at you," he interrupted, smirking. "But I'm saying you're more capable than you think, and if you ever need help, real help, not a handout, I'd be there." Her throat tightened. No one had ever just believed in her like that. She looked away, overwhelmed. "You're impossible," Logan chuckled. "So I've been told." Lunch stretched longer than either of them intended, but neither seemed to care. When they finally left, Logan insisted on walking her back to the bakery. As they reached the door, she hesitated. "You're dangerous," she murmured. Logan arched a brow. "Dangerous," she exhaled, looking up at him, "because you make me want things I shouldn't." For the first time since she met him, Logan looked caught off guard. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she pushed up onto her toes and pressed the lightest of kisses to his cheek. It was nothing, and yet it felt like everything. She pulled back quickly, heart racing. "I'll see you around, Logan." And then she disappeared inside, leaving him standing there, watching her like she was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Logan had never been the kind of man to second-guess himself. He made decisions quickly and with certainty, whether in business or in life. But as he stood outside the bakery that evening, watching Natalie disappear behind the door, he realized something unsettling. He didn't want to walk away. He didn't want this to be a fleeting moment, a passing attraction that burned out as quickly as it ignited. There was something about her that pulled at him in a way he couldn't explain. And for the first time in years, Logan Carter wasn't sure what to do next. Natalie had barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the ghost of her own impulsiveness, the warmth of Logan's skin beneath her lips. The way his expression had shifted, just for a second, into something vulnerable. She shouldn't have kissed him, even if it had been brief, even if it had just been his cheek. It had been reckless and she wasn't reckless, or at least she hadn't been. Now, as she moved around the bakery the next morning, trying to focus on anything but the memory of Logan standing under the glow of the streetlights, her concentration was shattered by the sound of the door chime. She turned, expecting a customer, maybe even Jordan, but instead Logan stood in the doorway, his presence filling the small space effortlessly. He carried 2 coffees. Natalie folded her arms as he stepped toward the counter. "If you're trying to bribe me with caffeine, it's working." Logan smirked, setting one of the cups in front of her. "I figured as much." She took the cup, fingers curling around the warmth. "So are you just going to keep showing up here?" He studied her, his expression unreadable. "Would you rather I didn't?" Natalie hesitated. That was the problem, wasn't it? She didn't want him to stop. But she also didn't want to be another woman who fell too easily into Logan Carter's orbit. She sighed, taking a sip of the coffee. "You're persistent." "I'm resourceful," he corrected smoothly. "And I don't like leaving things unfinished." Her stomach twisted at the implication. She set the cup down, leveling him with a look. "What exactly is unfinished?" Logan exhaled, leaning slightly against the counter. "You kissed me." Natalie's entire body tensed. "It was barely, it was enough." Their eyes locked, and suddenly the air between them felt charged again, like it had that night outside her apartment. She swallowed hard. "Logan, this isn't a good idea." "That's what makes it interesting." His voice was low, teasing, but there was something else there, something deeper. Natalie shook her head. "You don't do relationships." Logan tilted his head slightly. "Maybe I just haven't found the right one." Her heart stuttered. "You don't even know me." He didn't argue. Instead, he studied her for a long moment before saying, "Then let me." Her breath caught. This was dangerous. Everything about Logan was dangerous. But as she looked into his piercing blue eyes, she realized something terrifying. She wanted to let him. Logan had been patient, but patience could only last so long. Over the next few weeks, he made sure Natalie had no choice but to see him. He stopped by the bakery in the mornings, sometimes with coffee, sometimes just to steal a few minutes of her time before she got too busy. He never pushed, never demanded anything from her. He simply made his presence known, and slowly she started letting him in. She let him walk her home after late shifts. She let him take her to quiet restaurants where they could talk without interruption. She let him see parts of herself she didn't share with just anyone, her fears about never taking risks, her hesitation to believe that something like this, whatever it was, could last. And Logan. Logan found himself doing something he never did. He waited. He didn't rush her, didn't try to force anything. He had never pursued a woman like this before, never cared enough to. But Natalie wasn't like anyone else. Then, one evening, everything shifted. They had been walking along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting off the dark water, when Natalie stopped abruptly. Logan turned to her, brows furrowing. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, looking up at him. "I don't know how to do this." His chest tightened. "Do what?" Natalie hesitated, then exhaled. "Trust this." "Trust you?" Logan's throat went dry. He took a step closer, resisting the urge to reach for her. "I get it, I do." She searched his face. "Do you?" "Yes." His voice was firm, certain. "But I also know that if I walk away right now, I'll regret it, and I don't think you want me to walk away either." Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time since he'd met her, Natalie looked unsure of herself. So Logan made the decision for her. He reached out, fingers grazing the side of her face, tilting her chin up slightly. And then, without hesitation, he kissed her. It wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate. It was slow, deliberate, as if he was proving something with every brush of his lips against hers. And when she kissed him back, when her hands slid up to his chest, her fingers curling into his shirt, Logan knew. There was no walking away from this, from her. When they finally pulled apart, Natalie's eyes were wide, her breath uneven. Logan smirked, brushing his thumb along her cheek. Still think this is a terrible idea, she exhaled a shaky laugh. Absolutely. But she didn't step away, and Logan knew he had her. Natalie wasn't sure what changed in that moment by the waterfront, but she knew something had. She had spent weeks convincing herself that Logan was a risk, that letting him in would only lead to disappointment. But when he had kissed her, all of those carefully built defenses had crumbled. She had kissed him back because she wanted to. No overthinking, no hesitation, just want. And now, as she stood in her apartment, staring at her reflection in the mirror, she felt like she had stepped into something she couldn't turn away from. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, Logan stood there, looking as composed as ever, but there was something different in his expression, something softer, more certain. "Hope I'm not too early," he said, his voice smooth, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, anticipation, maybe. Natalie smirked as she grabbed her coat. "You're exactly on time." He held out his hand, waiting. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Not because she didn't want to take it, but because she knew that once she did, there was no turning back. She took his hand. Logan's fingers curled around hers, warm and steady, and just like that, her world shifted. The restaurant Logan took her to was nothing like the high society venues she had expected. It was intimate, tucked away in a quiet part of the city with soft lighting and an atmosphere that made everything feel personal. As they sat at their table, Natalie studied him. He was different tonight, less polished businessman, more something else. "You're staring," Logan murmured, amusement in his tone. She tilted her head. "I'm trying to figure you out." His lips twitched. "And," she tapped her fingers against her glass, "you're not what I expected." Logan leaned in slightly. "Good or bad?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing that mattered in that moment. "Good," she admitted. Logan's smirk faded into something more genuine. He reached across the table, brushing his fingers against hers. The touch was brief, but it sent a slow warmth spreading through her chest. He didn't rush the conversation, didn't try to fill the silence with unnecessary words. Instead, he listened to her, to the unspoken things between them. By the time they left the restaurant, Natalie felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Days passed, and Logan became a constant presence in her life. He didn't just show up when it was convenient. He showed up when she had long shifts at the bakery and needed a distraction. He showed up when she was too tired to cook and insisted on taking her somewhere easy and comfortable. He didn't try to overwhelm her with grand gestures, didn't try to impress her with his wealth. Instead, he showed his interest in smaller, quieter ways, the kind that mattered. And that was what made it dangerous. Because with every passing day, Logan Carter was becoming something more than just a man she was drawn to. He was becoming someone she could trust. One evening, they found themselves on his penthouse balcony, the city stretched out below them. Natalie leaned against the railing, the cool air brushing against her skin. Logan stood beside her, drink in hand, his gaze flicking between her and the skyline. "I don't think I ever asked," he said suddenly. "Why baking?" She glanced at him. "Why business?" A smirk. "Deflecting," Natalie exhaled, shifting slightly. "It's the only thing that ever made sense to me. I like creating something from nothing, taking ingredients, mixing them together, and making something that means something to people." Logan studied her, his expression unreadable. "There's something satisfying about that, isn't there? Building something real." She nodded, but there was something about the way he said it that made her pause. "You built something too," she said. "More than just a business." Logan's jaw tightened slightly. "I had to." Natalie turned toward him fully. "Because of your family." A flicker of something passed through his expression. He rarely talked about his past. She knew little about it, only that his success hadn't been handed to him. Logan hesitated, then exhaled. My father ran his company into the ground, left us with nothing. I learned early on that if I wanted stability, I'd have to build it myself. Natalie's chest tightened. And you did. Logan's gaze locked onto hers. I did. She didn't know why, but knowing that about him, knowing that he hadn't just inherited his success, that he had fought for it, made something inside her shift. Maybe that was why he understood her, because he had once been chasing something too. The weeks passed, and slowly, Logan became more than just the man who had once been a risk. He became the man she trusted, the man she wanted. And then, one evening, Logan did something that changed everything. They were sitting on her couch, a movie playing in the background, when he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Natalie frowned. "What's that?" Logan handed it to her, his expression unreadable. She opened it, her breath catching as she read the contents. It was a lease for a space, a bakery space, her bakery space. Natalie looked up, heart pounding. "Logan, what is this?" His voice was quiet but firm. "It's yours if you want it," she shook her head. I can't accept this." "I can't." Logan reached for her hand, his grip steady. "It's not a gift. It's a loan, a real one. No strings, no expectations, just a chance." Natalie stared at him, emotions crashing over her. No one had ever believed in her like this. No one had ever done something for her without expecting something in return. She swallowed hard. "Why would you do this?" Logan's gaze didn't waver. "Because I know what it's like to want something so badly but be too afraid to take the leap." Her throat tightened. She had spent so long convincing herself that she couldn't take risks. And then Logan Carter had walked into her life and made her believe she could. Natalie exhaled shakily. "I don't know what to say." Logan's lips curved slightly. "Say yes." She looked at the papers in her hands, then back at the man sitting across from her, and for the first time in her life she didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered. Logan's smile was slow, but there was something deeper in it, something that told her this was just the beginning. Not just for her dream, but for them. Months later, Natalie stood inside her brand-new bakery, the scent of fresh bread and pastries filling the air. Customers lingered at small tables, sunlight streaming through the windows. And standing by the counter, watching her with a look that sent warmth spreading through her chest, was Logan. She walked over to him, unable to hide her smile. He smirked. "Told you you could do it." Natalie rolled her eyes but reached for his hand, squeezing it. Maybe she had once thought he was a risk. But now, Logan Carter was the best decision she had ever made.